Welcome to Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast. I'm the creator and host, Andrew Rizza. I'm an allied healthcare professional that has worked in the industry for over 25 years, with the majority of my practice being in the private physical therapy space and in public school athletics. My curiosity prompted me to create Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast to discuss the ever-changing landscape in the healthcare industry, focusing on sports medicine, physical therapy, athletic training, and sports science. Each week, we will discuss the barriers that healthcare professionals face and how we as individuals can collaborate to make the listeners better understand the industry for a better patient and athlete experience. Now, on to the show. Welcome to Episode 4, Part 2 with Vin Ferrara, CEO of Home Impact Partners. In Part 2, Vin and I discuss the challenges in the healthcare system and the need for healthcare to reach people in their homes. We discuss the need for awareness and access to healthcare, highlighting the importance of addressing both the economic impact and the availability of resources. Vin goes on to explain his goal of working with developers and builders to create healthier communities and improve the health impact of the built environment. Vin then emphasizes the role of the environment in influencing behaviors and genetics and the importance of making daily choices for better health. We wrap up our conversation with some advice for students pursuing careers in healthcare and business, emphasizing the value of mentorship. Finally, reflecting on his career journey and the evolution of his focus on health and home. Now on to Part 2.
Part of my interest in the intersection of health and home comes from is that the upstream components of your health, your behaviors, your choices, your environments, things that happen at a young age, because you spend so much time in your home, so much of your health is going to be dictated by what's happening at home. And if our health system had continuity between what was happening at home, back to the beginning of our conversation, if there were continuity between what was happening at home and what's happening in the actual healthcare delivery space, we have a lot better outcomes. The health of our country, the United States, is surprisingly poor when you look at metrics compared to other wealthy nations. It's actually fairly startling, some of the statistics actually.
Well,
So
it is, and
better.
I think of just how advanced our technology is in our healthcare system, and it is a little staggering. But you wonder economically how how we're challenged economically with people in the country, right? How do they have access to that care and for the cost? So I think you made, thinking back to, a few minutes ago, we talked about access at home. That would lower the costs, obviously, for the patient that needs it versus the patient that has the means and the well-being to get out to a community. And you think of just rural areas. If somebody is, 50 miles from their closest regional medical facility, they're probably less likely to go to that facility than the one that's 2 miles down the road.
Right.
And then
Right.
economically, how does that impact them? Can they afford to pay that copay or that coinsurance that's allowing them to get the care they need? So I think there's definitely some correlation there where healthcare costs are always going up and they don't seem to be going the other direction. There is some value in, Obamacare or even, in our state, Mass Health, which does help. But not everybody has access, which is still pretty interesting that we're, an industry or I think a country that's very innovative and has the means, but we still see this decline in the great amount of people that have diabetes and cardiac conditions and other, diagnoses that we could, be more preventative with.
Yeah, and all of the innovation in the world is not going to be able to keep up with and correct the ramifications of unhealthy habits and lifestyle choices, which, starting with nutrition at the top of the list. I mean, there's no amount of healthcare technology, even with some of these incredible new drugs for weight loss again, they're on the receiving end, essentially, of, in a lot of cases, sort of it's almost like a tidal wave of people with health issues, and some people have health issues that have nothing to do with their own decisions or choices, right? There are plenty of people that have, are on the receiving end of bad luck. And our system, I think, does really well when people need sort of high-end specialized care. I think the main problem we have in our country is we're just exposed to so much excess, especially on the nutrition front. And the we were talking about air quality before, sort of air pollution and poor environmental quality, and we have a lot of that, and a lot of that is distributed unequally in our country also, right? So equity is a big issue.
Mhm.
So people who are of lesser financial means typically live in environments that are more polluted. They have less access to healthy foods, and so there's a lot to unravel with our system. And the common denominator is, is the home environment. You can have a healthy home environment um, in a small apartment, right? In a densely packed neighborhood, right?
Yeah.
A healthy home environment doesn't mean you have to have a gigantic home on a sprawling lot.
Hmm.
And so if we can help people in their homes, we can do a lot, I think, to uh, prevent some of these downstream effects. And point about my mother, for example, she had access to healthcare all around her. It was not an access issue. It was just sort of an awareness issue. And
Hmm.
so there's a lot to be done. When you get into deep conversations about healthcare and our health system, they can go on and on. And we could probably go on and on for days about our healthcare system.
Yeah, we shift gears to economics and think of the economic impact of this to just the individual. Um, I mentioned, being in a rural community or even like you said, a densely populated urban community. Um, where's the biggest focus, the biggest target? Like, do you think it is that, geographic location or community that is more densely populated or not? And the people that maybe don't have the economic means to be able to get access to someone to come in and be able to help them understand and educate them and give them the tools and the resources to do that. Now, is there programs that are set up to be able to help those people that can't afford to be able to set their home up properly?
Yeah, I mean there are certain programs, and I wouldn't want to attempt to try and say which populations are a higher priority, or for our efforts, we're kind of just getting started here and want to be able to contribute value across the board. I think that if you look at the distributions of like where people actually live in the United States, we're very much a suburban country. So you have cities, suburbs, and rural areas. And if my memory serves me correctly from an Urban Land Institute study, something like 75 to 80% of the population lives in what you would describe as the suburbs.
Hmm.
So just in terms of a population density where people live, so like around us here, this sort of Boston metro arc,
Yeah.
the density of people is going to live in that arc. And there's also, I think, the the conventional wisdom is that really wealthy people have means and resources to figure things out on their own, even if they're not actually figuring it out on their own. They have the resources. There are programs in place. There need to be more, but for people that might be of lesser means. Um, but there's a huge gap also in like middle class access to resources, and middle class financial strain, and housing affordability is hitting people very hard. So again, I would hate to attempt to say, yeah, this population needs more than that population. You need help across the board. So I'll leave it at that. We're going to try our best to provide value in all sorts of different areas.
The Home Impact Partners is going to work more with developers and, builders, I think you had mentioned. Um, what does that look like for you? Like, how are you going to work with them? Is that, trying to learn more about what they're putting into the home and then trying to influence better product that goes in for healthier homes? Is that more or less the focus?
My goal with that is to actually go back to medical school days, actually, where I really enjoyed one-on-one conversations with patients, with people, and gathering information from them about their health issues, concerns, needs, aspirations, synthesizing that information and reporting it back. We did that pretty extensively in medical school, certainly at Columbia. And my entire career really has been, in some way, shape, or form, about gathering health information, whether that was product feedback on a football helmet or, consulting arrangements, in my time in consulting or in the investment space, or gathering information on a particular product or technology. My career has always been about communications, for gathering that information, synthesizing it, and attempting to use it to create some sort of human impact, some sort of economic value. So what I'm seeing with an effort to work with real estate developers and investors is to do just that, is to be a conduit for information from people, consumers, families, with regard to their health needs, their aspirations, their wants, and then synthesize that information and get it in the hands of builders, developers. I'd say this is what's important to people, right? These types of amenities, in certain communities, certainly down south, out west, where there's more land, there are people building entirely new towns. My good friend Tom Hoban is building. He and his team at Kitson and Partners. The CEO of Kitson and Partners is a former NFL football player, Sid Kitson. Sid is a very visionary developer, and Tom is the president and chief investment officer of Sid's company. Sid is the CEO. They're building a community called Babcock Ranch, which was I believe, the largest land purchase in the history of the state of Florida, 90,000 acre ranch that was bought. And they're developing a third of it into essentially a city of the future with, solar powered, the utilities are built in such a way that Hurricane Ian went right over the property last year, and it sustained essentially no damage, just from the way it was built. And so my conversations with my friend Tom around health and the health impact opportunity that developers like them have is what kind of got me started down this path. And so I want to be a voice for consumers, for families, with regard to their health, and then communicate that to developers so that they can make strategic decisions. For people that are already living in those communities and benefiting from it, I want to be able to interview them and understand what they're doing, how they're using the amenities, how they're using the walking trails. And so those developers can use that for their marketing purposes, their public relations purposes. So I think there's a huge symbiotic value between health information and, what you can do with that strategically. So that's my goal, is to kind of get back into like medical student mode, interview people and synthesize that information and provide that to developers. And then along with that, I'm anticipating a newsletter that's developer and investor focused, where we're providing information sort of at the intersection of health and real estate development. So that's another effort that's getting off the ground here in parallel.
No, that's fantastic. And you mentioned walking trails in the communities down there. And I look at, like, as we're younger, we're pretty active, or most of us are active, but we live in communities where, unless we go to the gym or we go for a run or go for a bike ride or whatever, it's not in our general neighborhood, right? It's usually outside of or close to, where a lot of these communities in the retirement areas are building everything there. I was talking to a patient recently that goes to the Ocean Reef Club down in Florida, and he said there is no cars, only golf carts, but most of the people walk. There's like 90 pickleball courts, there's tennis, there's gyms, there's golf, like 3 or 4 golf courses. And you just look at that, and that healthy lifestyle, it's promoting more healthy lifestyle for them at the older ages. But, why can't we have that in every community, right? Where that's all available to bring a healthier home, healthier lifestyle to the people, that instead of, looking back retrospectively and saying, wait a second, why can't we be just very proactive in this? Right. But it sounds like the community that your friend is building is like, that's the vision, that's the futuristic vision of how we're going to build communities.
Yeah, it is. And that community is interesting too, in that it's not a retirement community. I mean, it is, there's, I believe at this moment they have 6 or 7 thousand residents on their way to a planned 55,000. And so they have schools now. There's a K-8 school, there's a high school, there's, athletic facilities, there's a town center. But it's so big. It would be like, I don't know, building a new, Natick or Wellesley, a town of that
Yeah, pretty
size.
big.
Yeah, and it takes, it takes a couple decades for that to get built out. And there are other communities like that across the country, but there are communities like that they're on a smaller scale, that exist in the Northeast. But we can kind of create those communities also. One of the newsletters, a recent one, the theme was build your own blue zone. So you probably heard about these blue zones around the world where people live to very extended ages. And the company Blue Zones has sort of, I would say, categorized the things that go on in those communities. And what it boils down to is those places essentially they make healthy choices easy, based upon sort of the patterns and habits of people. So movement is sort of a natural part of the lifestyle, and eating plant-based foods is part of the lifestyle. And so one of our newsletters was entitled essentially Build Your Own Blue Zone, focusing on movement and nutrition and finding the right mindset. Um, but people need help doing that. I think they need education. It's one of the things we're seeking to do, is kind of bring that information to people. So, our area around here, when the weather is right, we actually have a lot of what is necessary, right? We do have walking trails, and we have, I would say there's access obviously to healthcare here. There is generally access to healthy foods. When the weather is not great, when it's cold and it's raining like it is today, we tend
You're
to,
locked in the house.
yeah, we stay inside. And I think a lot of it comes down to that social element too. What are your friends doing, right? What are your behavioral patterns? And so I think if people can get educated on their health and how they can really control it, and sort of the daily decisions that they can make. And I'm not here preaching like I've been perfect with that either, right? Like I've got my own health issues that I've dealt with, and a lot of them were sort of, lifestyle or nutrition related. So this isn't me attempting to preach to anybody. It's really just all the collectively what we can all do, I think, are make these daily choices with regard to how we move, what we eat, who we interact with. And it's been shown, I think, that those types of small daily decisions are the kind of things that bring you a good health span, not just longevity, but bring you health today.
I'm the first one to raise my hand, and I'm eating the chocolate chip cookies before anybody else is. So
Yeah.
the
And
nutritional
the reality is, if you're,
decisions I
look, if
make.
you're making, if you're making good choices most of the time, the chocolate chip cookies are there.
They're
They're
good.
not. They're.
It was interesting. I was talking to my wife, kind of off subject here. My wife was her grandmother. Always when they went out to dinner, she would order dinner and then order dessert and take the dinner home. So she would eat her dessert and then take her dinner home for later. So, and she lived till she was like 92. So it was like she's doing something right. But yeah, I
Yeah,
think it's the
some people
lifestyle,
crack the code. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
what makes you do.
My grandmother is about to turn 100.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the Italian. I'm telling you, my grandmother and all her. So my dad, I pretty big Italian family. I don't know how big yours is. My dad came from 8 brothers and sisters. My mother 12. Um,
Wow.
all of my father's aunts, uncles. I think the uncles were a little bit. I think they probably passed in their late 70s, early 80s. But all the women lived into their mid 90s, and they all kept. They started at like 5'5" and they ended at 4'8". Italian women. But my grandmother would cook. We could smell the food from a mile away. I mean, she would cook and it's crazy. We talk about this.
cooked in lard, right? Everything was heavy oil. Everything was fried, but everything she cooked was fresh every day. If I went to see her, she'd go, Andy, can you go down to the market and get me some meat? Can you go down and get me some chicken? It was fresh.
Yeah.
Versus a lot of the stuff that we're getting now is like we're going and getting stuff for a week and putting in the refrigerator outside every day. So I guess it goes back to the lifestyle of what you're able to do in your busy life and what's accessible to you during the day. But
Yeah, and then there is a genetic component to it that we don't fully understand yet. So my grandmother who's 100, about to turn 100, she has outlived three of her four children, my mother being one of them.
it's amazing.
She's outlived her husband by 25 years, I think. And we like to say, she has this very easygoing mindset. Everything is just, she has a very peaceful way about her. So my brothers and I are like, my cousins, my brothers are like, maybe that's the secret, it's her mindset.
Yeah.
She's not,
No
for whatever
stress.
reason, she seems capable of not, absorbing stress the way other people do. There's, I think if you look at like the functional medicine space, it would say there's our genetics, there's our behaviors, and there's our environment. And actually your behaviors and your environment can actually influence your genetics. And we're sort of led to believe growing up that our genetics are our destiny. It turns out that there's this field of epigenetics, which is essentially the study of the way in which our genes respond, and what our genes produce is in large part in response to our environment, in large part in response to our behaviors. And then you look at the ways in which our behaviors are influenced by our environment, and it brings you to this, hey, the thing to focus on is your environment.
Yeah.
If you focus on your environment, you can improve its direct impact on your health through things like air quality, et cetera. But you can improve your health indirectly by the way your environment influences your behaviors. And that's the whole message behind the Blue Zone topic too, is like your environment is really, really critical for your health. And if you're going to attempt to change something, don't start by just attempting to change your behaviors through willpower. Change your environment first. Set up your environment so that it makes your healthier choices easier. That's kind of the messaging there.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with that. I feel like that what you're in and what your environment that you're rooted in, it's like always be present where your feet are, right? So be present where you are and understand that. And I think that will bring good things to you, and to the people around you. So I think that's an important message. What advice would you give, to, a young student or even a rising high schooler, or even, a college age student that is just starting out their career, trying to figure it out, that wants to pursue a career in medicine, public health, or even business? Is there something that you can, look back to that helped shape your career that you could influence or try to message to those ones that are looking to move into those spaces?
Yes, and my career has been it's been a journey, right? It's still a journey. It's something I think that I got sort of a late start on thinking about, and especially as an athlete, as a college athlete, especially, you're so consumed by that part of your life, that career planning and thinking about it can happen too late or happen not enough. And, I guess my thinking back, there's probably two things that I would recommend to anyone. One is pay attention to, be mindful of, sort of soak in the people that are around you. Back to the topic of your environment. You're most likely surrounded by people who have a lot of expertise, who would love to help you. You're surrounded by people who are potential mentors. And if they're your direct peers, they're people that are going to go on to do their own things that could be of interest to you. It's easy to get like super hyper focused on what you're doing, whether it's your sports or your classwork, or to get mired in, the latest, latest, latest rumination you might have about something, right? And so my advice would be like to kind of keep your head up, keep those connections alive, and ask for help from people. Conversation with whether it's your athletic trainers, your teachers, your coaches, your parents, friends. There's a lot of people around who want to help.
Okay.
So just kind of being open to that. And now with LinkedIn too, you can get on LinkedIn as a high school kid and be connected with, people that have had incredible careers. And so I would say that's just one, is sort of the connections. Number two, I would say pay close attention to the energy you derive from certain activities.
Okay.
Because we're all hardwired in certain ways for certain activities. We might have an interest in a field, like we might be interested in sports medicine, right? But maybe we're not hardwired for, the realities of the lifestyle, right? Or the path to take. Maybe it's, maybe our interest in sports medicine is really an interest in sports in general. And maybe we're hardwired to be more on sort of the business side of things. And so I would say, and you could probably get help from your mentors, your teachers. Try and figure out what really gives you energy. You close your eyes and think about a particular field. Like, so if you're interested in sports medicine, right? It's not all about, and you can tell us this better than anybody, it is not all about the championship games and, all the fun parts of sports. It is work, right? It is traveling. It is early hours. It's, you got your hands on
Weekends,
people.
holidays, yeah.
Weekends, holidays, you got your hands on people. You're talking to people about, so what's going on with them. And some people are, incredibly well hardwired to that. I assume you are. If not, you've learned it very well, or whatever. And I think, early on for me, I was interested in certain topics, but when I look back on them, they might not have been a good fit for me energetically, whereas other things might have been a better fit for me energetically. And that's might be a little bit of vague advice, but the things that we're hardwired for often show up at a young age, right? Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or, if you're comfortable with like a sales process, like reaching out to someone, for a cold sales process, if you're comfortable with that at a young age, you're probably going to be really good at that as you get older. If you're not comfortable with it, you might be able to get comfortable with it, but, maybe you're not hardwired for a sales role, right? So, those are probably the two things I would say, your network, people around you, and those people can be helpful to you, I think, in helping you sort of understand what really brings you energy. And if you're energized by something and you have people around you that can kind of help you navigate it, you'll be in really good shape as you go forward.
No, I think that's a great message. You'd mentioned the word mentorship, and I try to link this to every conversation that I have with, young athletes, or someone pursuing a career in physical therapy or athletic training, or even, even with my daughter who's, in graduate school for speech pathology. I think the power of mentorship is huge. I think it gives us the ability to be able to look to the people that helped us along the way, and even people we still look towards. And I still have my mentors that I've been, connected with and still talk to on occasion. And I've been in the industry for almost 30 years. So can you think back to like a mentor that kind of helped you along the way as a young aspiring college age student? And then is there someone now that you still turn to help you with some of these business decisions or ideas that you have?
Yeah, I think, I would say back in the early days as a young athlete, Dr. Boland, Dr. Steiner, both, were team physicians at Harvard. I think were very influential. Dr. Steiner, he did my shoulder surgery, but I also shadowed him in his office, and it was very enlightening actually, because like I was saying, you think of sports medicine as related to like the team and the game and all that. And going to his office, it was a very different environment. And he was, treating patients who weren't athletes and people that were coming in, um, you know, with, it just gave me a very different perspective on what orthopedics was actually, really, really all about. So I value them a lot. I would say later on in my career, I had, my experience with Zenith, I had a chance to have some folks as board members. Bill Cleary, was actually a board member, a great mentor, friend. There were some folks, who were helpful, I think, as I was navigating being an entrepreneur, right? That came with its own set of challenges. And I think looking back, that's something I could have done more robustly, was have sort of a personal board of directors, a handful of people that you can call upon. And that's something I think kids can do today, find a handful of people that you trust, and start to build those relationships, and people will help you, that most people are hardwired to provide help to people that are sincerely looking for it.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. Is there anything to kind of close out today? I think it's, been a great conversation, a lot of good insight on what your company is, what you're trying to do, which I think is fantastic for the general public and even for the healthcare industry. So I applaud you for that. I think it's amazing. Is there anything that you would change in your kind of your path, right? It's interesting when you look back to say, is there anything we do differently, or what, am I on the right path right now? And I think if we think of our careers, we're always educating, we're always changing, we're trying to make ourselves better. So I feel like there's always an evolution of what we're doing every day. But is there anything that you think that you could have done better, or do you feel like you're on the path that you like to be on?
I'd say yes and yes. I mean, there are probably countless things that I look back on and say I could have done that better. I could have I could have done that sooner. I could have not done that at all. Um, and I think it's important. I know some people say, "Oh, I never look back," and I do. And I look back and I try and think, okay, if I had that to do over again, what would I do? Um, And so there's a ton of little things I would change, right? Like how I handled that situation or that conversation. To me, I guess that's sort of still the quarterback in me. I don't identify that much anymore as being a quarterback, but that is kind of the culture of the quarterback, is you play the game and then you watch the film and you watch more film and you go back and you look and you're like, okay, and you have to be super accountable, right? You're in front of the team and the coaches are like, then why'd you do that? And you get used to saying, yeah, my bad. I screwed that up. I should have done this. There's a great Steve Young video on accountability. If you've ever seen it, if you haven't, I'll send it to you. And so I do that all the time. I don't do it in a way where like, man, I can't believe I did that. So I try and keep a positive mindset around it. I do feel like the last 10 years professionally have been very much kind of a journey, launching a football helmet company and, doing that for close to 10 years. The what's next after that, there's not an obvious like, oh, here's the next thing that you should do.
Right.
Because it's a very unique, it's not exactly healthcare. It's not exactly sports. It's a little bit of sports medicine. It's a little bit of consumer. It's a little bit of neuropsych. It's a little bit of, and so finding the exact next thing, especially, I think all entrepreneurs kind of go through this. I would say it's been a bit of a challenge to find like that absolute right next thing. So I've done a handful of things over the past years that have been great experiences. I've made great networks, but I do feel now what I'm doing is like, okay, this is what it all led up to is now, right? This intersection of health and home and all that goes into it, there's no way I would have had that perspective on it without going through those experiences before.
Yeah.
And so I feel very energized about what I'm doing now. And look, there's a whole host of things we still need to do, and we're just getting it off the ground. But I feel very energized by it. So, yeah, there are things I would change, but I wouldn't change them in a way that put me in a different place than now, right? Like we that would be, I don't know. I don't operate that way. So, like I said, my answer is yes and yes to
Yeah.
your dual questions.
Yeah, I mean, if I look back to your journey in, knowing you and kind of what I've observed, like going graduating from Harvard, getting your MD, going to business school, developing the helmet, which we kind of connected again, you know, that must be 15 years ago, right? When you brought the helmet over to Weston and we took a look at it and we started to use it. Your vision has always been to protect the public, whether it's athletes or non-athletes, right? I think now that kind of comes full circle back to where health and home looks like something that you're moving back into protecting the public, right? So I think
Appreciate
your
it.
mind is still, it's almost like your career is still medically based and is going to be medically based with a side hustle of business, right? So I think there's always that. Um, I think when we're involved in medicine, no matter what, if you're a nurse, if you're a physician, if you're a physical therapist, occupational therapist, your mindset is always on the healthcare industry, no matter how you slice it. So it's hard for us to get away from that. We just might have some offshoots, and it seems like that's kind of the route that you're going.
Yeah, I think that health theme has run through everything that I've done. There's a lot of health care in my family. My mother was an EMT. My three brothers, one's married to a physician, one's married to a nurse, one's married to a woman who's been in healthcare marketing, working for a hospital and health system. Um, one of my nieces is in pursuing physical therapy. So, there's just we've been, I think, a family broadly that's been focused around health, and health needs of people are certainly not going anywhere. They're only increasing. So I'm always, I think, drawn back to that. And then back to that topic of like what gives you energy. Um, that was really important for me to reflect, even at age, I'm 51 now, but I would say a couple of years ago, I was, talking about mentorship. I was getting actually some career coaching, and the person said, "Well, what were you like as a kid? What did you like to do?" And I said, when I was really left to my own devices, I'd play with Legos for hours. My mother used to say, like, I'd leave you alone and we wouldn't hear from you. You'd be building Legos. And that kind of got me thinking, like, you know what? I actually really enjoy working with my hands. And actually, that's what kind of got me started down the path of medicine, was the idea of being a surgeon. And when I'm left to my own devices now, I'm building stuff around the house. I'm tinkering with, airflow and lighting and or doing yard work. And that's what triggered me to be like, you know what? I should focus on like this intersection of health and home. I've been in health for a long time, but the home and it's like sort of the built environment for me is very motivating. My cousins, you know, my ancestors came from Italy to the Bronx, New York, to build homes in the Bronx. My
Mhm.
cousins on my mother's side of the family are still builders. I mean, they are like steel workers,
Yeah.
and so that's what sort of triggered me to get into this, was like that reflection on what really gives me energy,
Yeah.
was the idea of like building things. And so I was like, all right, how do I take this health background that I have, and I'm so glad I have it, and what can I do moving forward with it? And it all kind of came together around this intersection of health and home. So interesting how things take you on these journeys, and you just kind of have to pay attention along the way and stay connected with people along the way. So it's been fun staying connected with you. And as I said when we started, I appreciate everything you've done for me personally and for our family, our kids. It means a lot.
Well, I truly appreciate that, and I do appreciate you coming on today. Again, everybody, Vin Ferrara, homeimpactpartners.com, and then also Welcome Health and Home is the newsletter. And Vin, thanks again. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Riz. Appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Behind the Sports Medicine Podcast. This is your creator and host, Andrew Rizza. If you enjoyed the content from today's episode, give us a like, leave a comment, and share on social media. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Behind Sports Med Podcast, on X under AJR Sports Sci, or check out our websites at ajrsportscience.podbean.com and at ajrsportscience.com. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel at AJR Sports Science. Stay tuned for our next episode.